In this video, I'll show you how to build an automated content system to multiply and 10x your content output. I'll uncover the essential concepts for creating, producing, and distributing content efficiently. I'll walk through how I think about things, and then I'll build everything live from scratch, step by step in Airtable and Make.com so that you can see how to build this into your business today. At the end of this video, you'll have a working system that can publish 100 plus pieces of content per week and the skills to build these automations inside your business or build usable products that you can sell. So here's the plan. First, we're going to design the content database from scratch. I'll show you how to easily capture ideas into the system with voice notes through Slack. Then I'll show you how to turn that text content into videos with HeyGen using your own AI avatar. And I'll even show you how to turn that written content into graphics that you can post to social media. I'll explain my entire thinking process, make mistakes, and correct them all live. If you think content creation is hard and you want a simple system that you can set up in the next few minutes, this video is for you. All right, I'm going to start this video in Airtable, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new base. We're going to start from scratch, and I'm going to take a little bit more time to go through everything and really do a good job of not only building the automation, but also making this presentable and usable for a user, because Airtable is a very powerful platform, but you can also make it better by spending a bit of time really building out these views and taking the time to structure everything right and group all of your views along the left-hand side and making sure your users are only seeing certain columns when they need to in certain parts of your workflow. And I think beyond just setting up the automations, going through that process and thinking it through is going to help you a lot when you go to create your own automations for your business, for your own users, or if you want to turn something like this into an actual product. So I'm going to come up here first and foremost and name my base. So this is ultimately going to become a product that is inside of my no-code architects community. I've built several other versions of the content engine database, and I'm taking all that knowledge this year in 2025 and rebuilding everything from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and name that KEDB community. Then I'll put YouTube demo here. And then I'll go ahead and pick a color that I like. The version that we build today is going to be powerful, but if you want the full version, check out the community in the description below. So I'm going to rename this the content tab or the content table. And this is going to be our main table where we store content. Now, first thing I'm going to do is really start to restructure these columns here. I could edit these and change them, but I'm just going to delete them and start from the very beginning, and we'll look at this column here. So in Airtable, this first column here on the left-hand side is your primary column, and I'll have a few chances to explain this in more detail as we go, but this column is a little bit more important than the rest of the columns. And when I'm building these content databases, I like this first column to be an ID field that allows us to uniquely identify every single row from any other row. So I usually name this content ID, but this is going to be a formula field that is based off of this field here, and you'll see why in a moment. But I'm going to use this auto number field. And I don't know why I've developed this convention, but for this particular column, I always call it auto ID in uppercase. If I just called it ID, it gets confused with record ID and IDs also when you're building out your automations. It's harder for me to explain how that happens, but down the line, we'll see this and we'll be able to use it and it'll make a little bit more sense later. So I'm going to go ahead and create that field. And so you can see what's happening here is that this is a special type of field that is giving each row a unique ID. So technically I could use this as my primary field, but because it's the content tab, I like to prefix the ID with a C. So I'm going to come here, edit the field. I'm going to rename it to content ID. I'm going to change this to a formula. I'm going to type C ampersand auto ID. It'll auto complete for you. And then I can click save. So now here we can see we have CID instead of just an ID. And that will help us differentiate IDs that are in the content table from any other IDs that we might create in other tables. So now realistically, the user doesn't need to see this one. They're going to see this content ID here. So I'm going to go ahead and hide it. Now, first thing, I'm going to also add the record ID, which is going to expose the internal ID that Airtable uses behind the scenes into an actual column, because sometimes it's very useful to have that. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to add another formula. I'm going to type record, and it's going to pop this up here. I'm going to go ahead and hit record ID, and then I'll go ahead and create that field, and we have that. So now we can use that later on down in the automations when needed. I add that to every table that I create in Airtable. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't, but I use it enough so that I just create it every time now. So now the user doesn't need to see that. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that. And then for usability, we really don't need to necessarily see this column name here. So I'm just going to move this all the way over. So now we can just see these IDs. And then typically what I would do is I would start to sort these, and I would sort it by auto ID in reverse order. That way, as we add new pieces of content, the most recent are always at the top. How you sort them will depend on what view we're looking at, and we'll start to talk about that in just a few minutes. But now we're starting to have the basics of our database. I'm going to go ahead and add a few more things that I know we'll need. So every piece of content is going to need a description. We'll make that a single line text. We'll give that a bit more space. And then most content is going to have some sort of text. So we're going to add a long text field here, and we're going to call this text. Now this text would be different depending on where we're publishing this content. So if we're publishing it on TikTok, it's going to be the description of your video, the caption, the same for Instagram Reels. On LinkedIn, it's going to be the text that would go into a text post. On YouTube, this would be the description. So we're going to name it text, but depending on where we publish it, it's going to have a different name. So I'm going to go ahead and create this field now. Now I'm going to go ahead and create two additional fields. One for being able to add images. So I'm going to type image, and then I'm also going to add one for video. So now we can attach images and also videos to any given piece of content. And then I'll also add one more field here, which is the title. So you can also remember that certain types of content, like a YouTube video, is also going to need a title. LinkedIn, when you post a text post, you don't need a title. So sometimes this will be left blank and sometimes it will not. So if this is a YouTube video, we're going to end up needing the text, we're going to need the image, and we're going to need the video, and we're also going to need a title. And I still keep a description here because this more describes for you what the video is all about, whereas this is more about what we're actually going to publish. Sometimes the title is enough, but sometimes I find that you also want a description. Now in this video, I'm also going to show you an alternate way of storing the text. It could be possible that you don't mind writing all of your copy. This could be an entire blog article, perhaps. And in this interface, it's not as friendly as a document. This does come down to choice. Some people really prefer to have the entire text in Airtable and they just edit it here. But other people prefer to edit their text in a document itself. So I'm also going to show you how you might also use a Google Doc instead of a text box like this. And then in this video, I'll actually use both of these. And then later on down the line, you can decide which one you like better. So I'm going to come up here. And I'm going to insert to the right, and I'm going to add a URL here, and I'm just going to type text document. And so this will allow us to use a Google document to store our text instead of just a text field. I'll go ahead and create that. All right, great. So now that we have the basics of our table here, we're going to add a lot more columns as we go. But this is enough to get started. Now I want to turn our attention to the views along the left-hand side here. If you're not as familiar with Airtable, Airtable is really a spreadsheet on steroids. You can see this is really turning out to be much like an actual spreadsheet, except that it acts more like a database in that we have these different columns here. We can define them. We have all of these different column types that will help us enforce what a user is actually able to put into that column. And there's some really cool ones here like rating. Let's actually add something like that in here so we can rate our own content. So down the line, when we actually publish content and we see it perform, we can actually keep track of the rating so that we can repurpose the good performing content. I'll go ahead and hide this for now. But Airtable acts a lot like a spreadsheet. The tabs along the top are really more like what a spreadsheet would have along the bottom. But what the views will help you do is establish workflow. Because at any given point in your workflow, you're going to want to see different columns when you're just working with ideas, right? And you're going to want to see different columns when you're approving content. And you're going to want to see different columns and maybe different content when you're ready to actually publish your content, right? And we'll make that more concrete as we go. So from here, what I would start to do is I would start to add a few new sections. Usually when I'm building out a system, I'll have some sort of inbox. And I'll show you something else that I like to do. I like to use icons. So I'll type inbox here. And I'll use this little icon. I find these little icons make the user experience quite a bit better. I'll call this inbox, and I'll move this into the inbox. And then I'll create another section here. We'll call this in progress. And I'll give this one a little icon as well. Maybe we'll use a person running. Have fun with it. Now I don't have any views in there yet. I'll go ahead and just duplicate this one. But to give you an idea here, inside my inbox, this is where we want to do anything that we need to do to the content to prep it for actually working on it. And that might be scheduling content. So let's actually add that now. Let's add a publish date. We'll add a date field. You can add a time if you want. I'm going to leave that off for now. Keep things a little bit more simple. So maybe what your inbox is for is to capture all of the new ideas, make sure everything is prepped, and then you select a publish date. And then that way you can get it out of the inbox and into in progress for your team to actually work on, or maybe you're working on this all by yourself, but you can use this in progress to keep track of everything that's in progress and separate it from everything that's in the inbox and needs to be processed. So I might change some of these things later, but let's come into the in progress here, and you can start to see what I mean by that. So in this case, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to filter content where the publish date is not empty. And notice that everything disappeared because in this view here, which is showing us all content, every publish date is empty here. So we need to add a publish date. And now if we come back to in progress, we're going to see we now have a row here. It's hard to see, but there's a row here. And then once I kind of figure out what I want to name these different views, we'll change this. But let's come back up here. So now what we want to do here is we want to change the filter to where publish date is empty. Right? So here we're seeing all of the content where the publish date is empty so that we can schedule it. And on that note, let's change this to schedule since that's what the view is for. And I'm going to actually come back to the front. I'm going to add a cool little icon, type calendar. It always gets frustrating when you can't find an icon that matches what you want. All right, so now we have the inbox and the schedule. And now some of these columns might be removed from this view, but I'm not quite sure yet. But you're starting to see here is that we can create these different views along the left-hand side here, which are going to help us segment the data from other parts of the system so that we can always see what we need to see no matter what part of the process we're in. If we're trying to get all of the content that's in progress out the door, we don't want to be confused with everything that isn't even scheduled yet. Remember, when you're working with just ideas, you might not ever publish it. It might not ever become a piece of content. All right, so from here, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to show you something that I do on every single table. I'm going to add another section here. I'm going to call it Other, and I'm going to add another grid view, and I'm going to call this All Data and Fields. And I always add this to every table because as you can see, as we build out these different views with different filters, you can find yourself in a situation where because you have these filters or these different columns, you're actually not able to see all of the content. Something might be lost and it might not be showing up in any view and you might not know why. So I always create this other view called All Data and Fields. I never add a filter to it and I never hide any fields. That way I can always come here and just see everything, right? I can see the auto ID that we created at the beginning. You might have already forgot about that. Remember, we created the record ID. We created the stars here. We're not able to see those anywhere. But this view is really good because I guarantee you, as you're building this out, you're going to lose a row and not know why it's not showing up. And then you can just pop down here without messing up your other views. Because what I see often is that people come to one of their views and then they come in here and they start messing with it. And now it's starting to mess with the user interface and then they kind of forget about it. So this is just a good way of making sure that you can always access that data. All right, so let's continue to build this out a bit. So with every single piece of content, we have text, we have an image, and we have a video, and we have a title and a publish date. So for in progress at any given time, you might want to be able to focus in on any piece of content that doesn't have one of those things complete. So then from here, what I might do is I might turn this into an overview. And for overview, I like to use the magnifying glass. So I'll put a little magnifying glass there. I'll type overview. And then I'm going to leave most of everything exposed here because it's an overview. But then what we're going to need is we're going to need a status for each of these. So I'm going to do an insert right. I'm going to do a single select. I'm going to add a couple options here. In progress. Going to turn this into red. Then we'll have needs review. We'll make that yellow. And I'll also add approved. And I've developed some of these conventions over time, like using these different colors. I'm going to call this the text status. And then for image and video and title, I'm just going to duplicate that field a few times. So we have our text status. Then I'm going to rename this to image status. I'll move this over to the image. Then I'm going to create a video status. Then I'm going to take this last one, I'll move it over here, and I'm going to call this the title status. So we'll continue to refine this, but now you can see here is even on this screen here, we're starting to get quite a few columns. And so space and user experience is going to start to become important. So sometimes I obsess quite a bit with the column widths. I'll make them as small as possible. Video status, title status, publish date. And then I start to think, okay, publish date is pretty important. So I'm going to put that over here. We're also likely to sort by publish date in this case instead of the CID, because we'd like to see the items that we're going to publish at the top. So I might change this now to publish date, earliest first. And then down the line, we'll make a decision on whether we're going to use the text field here or a text document. And I'll show you how to build that out. While I'm here though, I'm going to go ahead and add a button, because if there's just a URL here, it's not as user-friendly than if I have an actual button. So I'm going to insert a button to the right, call it text. Make it a nice big blue button. The label, we'll call it open text. And then for the formula, we're going to use the URL from the text document. Text document, create it. I'd actually prefer that this one is called text document, but we already have this here, so it's not going to let me save it. But I'm going to rename this to text document 2 just for a second. I'm going to create it. I'm going to come back here. I'm going to call this text URL. To better describe what it is. Then I'm going to come back here and rename this to text document. So I spend quite a bit of time obsessing about these names and these different fields to be consistent, because in the end, this is going to create the user experience and the maturity of a good product. So now that we have the overview here, we might also want a view where you only see the pieces of content where the text is not approved, and one where the image is not approved, and one where the video is not approved. Now, if you're only working with a few pieces of content at a time, just seeing them all in one view is not an issue. But once you start to have a lot of content and they're all in various different states, sometimes it's nice to be able to say, hey, what are all the pieces of content where the video is missing or it's not approved? So what I could do here is simply duplicate this view a couple times. And then here, what we're going to do is we're going to say video. And then here, we'll change this to image. And then we'll change this one to text. I'll use a little document like that, and we'll put text. And in text, what I'll do is I'll include the copy and the status. So now in this view, if we only really want to see the videos, then what I would do is I would just come here and I would hide all of these. We don't need the text status. We don't need the image. We don't need the image status. Now we have the video and the video status. We don't need the title or the title status. And now what we would do is we would update the filter, and we would say where the video status is not approved. So now we're only going to see content in the system that has a publish date where the video status is not approved. So now you can start to see how this is going to help us filter and establish workflow. So now let's jump over to image, do the same thing. Here, all we want to see is the image and the image status. Now we hide the video. And we don't need the title. And we'll update the filter so its image status is not approved. And then for the text, this time, I'm going to go ahead and assume that we're going to use the text document for now. In the background, I'll continue to use the text field in case that's how you want to do it. I'm going to leave the text status. Remove the video. And then just for convenience, I'm going to leave title and title status here because that's text. So I could break that up if I wanted to, but that might be overkill. You'll find as you go and you learn, these choices become pretty crucial, and sometimes you can actually go overboard. So there's a balance on how you create these different views. When is it too much? When is it too little? And that comes with experience. And it also just comes with listening to your customers or listening to your team or listening to what you want and adjusting accordingly. So now here I'm going to jump back to overview, and I'm going to finish the filter here, because in this case, this is the overview. So here we want to see everything with the publish date and any piece of content where one of these pieces isn't finished. So this is a situation where we can come up here and we're going to add a condition group. So we want the publish date to be not empty, and we're going to add a couple different conditions here, and you'll see. And these are going to be ORs. So here we're going to say where video status is not approved, image status is not approved, or text status is not approved. So in this case, we're going to see all of the content where there's a publish date or one of these things is not done yet. So even if I go here and put approved and approved, it's still going to be here because this is not approved. But as soon as I go through all of these, but actually I realize we have title here too. So I'm going to come here, add one more. Is not approved. So it pops back. And that reminds me I need to go over here. So in this case, sometimes you have to use these groups because you have to mix ands and ors. And you can't mix ands and ors all on the same level. So sometimes you'll have to create these groups where you can mix an and then inside the group you can use your ors. So here we're going to add two conditions. Text status is not approved, and title status is not approved. All right, great. So we've made a lot of progress. I might also come up to here. I might add a little trademark symbol up here. Then I might also put a version 1.0. All of this little detail tends to make your solutions just look that much more professional. Now, a few more views that I know we're going to need, so I'll go ahead and add them now. I'm going to add another section here, and I use this section for automations. So we'll use a lot of these different views here to actually trigger automations as well. So not only do they serve to help facilitate workflow for people and how they go about using the system and seeing what content they need to see, but we're also going to add views that will help trigger our automations on the back end and establish automated workflows. So here I'm going to put a little robot. And then one of the first automations I'm going to add here is I'm going to add a little grid. Then I'm going to add an icon for building. And I'm going to call it Initialize Content. And we'll use this one for when we create new rows that don't have a text document yet. I'm going to go ahead and create that view. And then I'm going to push this up into the automation area. And then another thing that I'm just realizing here as well is that we don't really have a folder to store anything in Google Drive. So if we're going to create a document, we probably also want to have a Google folder that can store this. And even though in this example, I'm going to be using the attachment fields in Airtable for storing images and videos, which is totally fine. Down the line, when you have a ton of videos in here or a ton of images, you might want to switch from using Airtable to Google Drive just in terms of like being able to store a ton of content. So just to start to think ahead, I'm going to go ahead and also add a folder URL. And then I'm going to duplicate this. We'll rename it to folder. I'll make it green. We'll use the folder URL. We'll save it. So now we also have a spot for a text document and also a folder to store content. In the new version that I'm actually going to release into the community, I use both in a really clever way, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. All right, so now let's update this view here. We don't want to see the actual URL in the overview, so I'm going to hide that. I'm going to hide these fields here in the overview as well. So we have our text document. You can get access to the folder itself. All right, so now let's go ahead and build out our first automation. All right, so the first automation we're going to create is to initialize our content. And by initialize, I mean, well, if we're going to have a document and a folder available for this piece of content to actually do some work, to store images or to store anything that we want related to this piece of content, outside of these attachment fields. Maybe we're storing original content that was recorded, and this is just used for the final content, whatever that is. We're going to need to create an automation that runs and actually creates and attaches the document and the folder to any specific row. So I'm going to come down here to Initialize Content, and now I need to think to myself, okay, when is it that I want content to come into this view so that as it comes into the view, I can then set up a trigger that will then trigger an automation. And so if we're trying to initialize the content, well, we can say, well, whenever there is a row where the text URL, and remember that's hidden, where the text URL or the folder URL is empty, we should trigger that automation. So I'm going to come back to Initialize Content. And what I like to do for these views is I like to only show the columns that are used to figure out what shows up in this view here. And I'll show you how that actually triggers in just a moment. So I'm going to come up here to the filter, and we're going to say where the text URL is empty or the folder URL is empty. And then what I would do is I would come up to the fields here, I would hide them all, and then I would simply show the ones that we're actually using in the filter, just to keep things clean. So then what we would do is we would come up to our automations and we would create our first automation. I'm going to add a trigger. We can say when a record enters a view, then I can select the table, content table, view, initialize content. And now what we're going to need to do is we're going to run a script that will trigger a make automations. So I'm going to come down here to run script. And now we're going to need a bit of code. I'm going to jump into my community, go to the classroom. I'm going to jump into the make an Airtable course. I'm going to go to the instant triggers. I'm going to grab this bit of code right here. We'll drop this into Airtable. You can take a pause and just copy and paste what we have here. I'm going to come and add a variable. I'm going to name this variable exactly what I have here, which is record ID. Pay attention to the upper and lower case or it will break. And I'm also going to add in a webhook URL here. So I'm going to add two variables, record ID. We'll go ahead and grab the record ID from the record that was in the previous step in the trigger. And then here I'm going to add in webhook URL. Again, I'm spelling everything just as it is right there. And here I'm going to actually put in a value. I'm not going to take it from the trigger. So I'm going to jump over to make, going to add the first automation. This is going to be a webhook, custom webhook. Going to add that webhook right here. Go ahead and click save. I'm going to copy this link right here by clicking copy address to clipboard. We'll click save. I'm going to save the automation. I'm going to rename this so I can find it later. And we'll call this Airtable triggers. For now, I'm going to save it. I'm going to go ahead and run once as well. So it's waiting for something to send something to that webhook. I'm going to drop that webhook right here. I should be able to trigger this. Actually, it's reminding me that I haven't actually triggered that first step here. So just to show you what I mean here, I'm going to go to finish editing. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click on the trigger here, which will run when a row comes into this view, and we have 5 of them here. So if I come back to automations, I can choose a record. It's going to show all 5. I'll go ahead. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to grab C1. If I come back to run script and edit the code, I can test it. It was successful. Come back to make. Notice that it ran. It's showing us that we passed the record ID into the make automation. Remember that record ID. It's this record ID here. And now we can use that to actually load up the data here and then also to save the data. One thing that we're going to do is we're going to use this automation for a lot of different triggers, not just one. So I'm going to end up creating a router here, just like this, so that we can use this same automation for different purposes. This could be initialize content and this could be something else. But in order to do that, we're going to need to know which path to go down. So I'm going to jump back to my automation now and just add in something right here. So I'm going to add in a plus. Then I'm going to add an ampersand, and I'm going to type action equals, and I'm just going to type initialize underscore content. And it looks like I put an equal sign there instead of a plus. So now what it's going to do is it's going to trigger this webhook URL, send the record ID, and then also send an action variable with what action it is, which is initialize content. So now if I come back to make, let's save it. Let's run it. I'm going to trigger it, jump back to make. Now, if we look here, we also have record ID and the action with initialize content. So I'm going to grab this initialize content. Now in the filter here, I can say where the action equals initialize content, save. Notice here in the webhook, we didn't send any data from that row. So we don't have that row. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to come here and I'm going to add a new module, Airtable, get record. you'll need to set up a connection to your Airtable database. I've already done that. I'm going to use an existing connection. And for the base, I'll type community, which will load up our KEDB community version 1.0, the YouTube demo, table content. For record ID, we'll patch in the record ID from the webhook. We'll click save. And then what that will do is that anytime we have an action coming through here, we can load that record so that any one of our paths has access to it so that we don't have to put that every time on this side of it, right? We can just do it once and then all of our paths will have access to this record instead of having to put this on every single automation. So now here we have initialize content. So now what we can do is we can actually initialize that content. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to create a folder that's going to store this particular CID. So on that note, I'm going to jump over to Google Drive. I'm going to create a base folder for the entire system. So we'll call it KEDB Community YouTube Demo. So we're going to create all of our folders inside this main folder. So I'm going to grab this ID here. Back to make, I'm going to go to Google Drive, create folder. Might need to add a connection for a folder location. You could actually just use this selector and actually navigate to it. I tend to like to use the actual ID. So I'm going to put the ID of the original folder. And then for the folder name, I'm going to go ahead and use the content ID with an underscore and then the description, and then I'll go ahead and click save. Now it's showing me an error here. I'm going to just click into it. Sometimes it gets that wrong, and when you save it away, it goes away. So now we have the folder. Now I'm going to create a document. So this time, type Google Docs. We can grab that here. We can create a new document. For the name, I'm going to go ahead and use the content ID underscore text. For the content, I'm just going to go ahead and put something, because you have to put something, replace text with post, copy, or description. So there's just something in there. For the document location, we're going to use the ID of the Google Drive folder in the previous step. Just add the folder ID just like that. Go ahead and click save. And now the only thing we need to do is take these new IDs, or actually the URLs that we generate, and update our row. Go to Airtable. This time we're going to update a record. It should use the same connection you've already got. Select the base, table, content. For the record ID, we can use the record ID coming in from the webhook. Just scroll down, grab that. For the text URL, we're going to grab in the web view link for the text URL, and then we'll scroll down for the folder URL, and we'll put the web view link for the folder URL. We'll click save. We'll save it. Let's go ahead and run once. Come back to Airtable. Let's go ahead and test it. Jump back to make, creating the folder. Now we have an error here. Let's see what we did wrong. File not found. So this is happening simply because I have the wrong connection here. It's going to a different drive. So just fix that. So what was happening there is I had a different connection that was connected to a different drive that didn't have access to that ID, that folder ID, and therefore it errored out. So we'll click save, we'll fix that. Very easy to make some of those mistakes. Come back to Airtable, trigger it again, come back to make, create a new folder. Now it's going to be able to create that document. Now it's going to update Airtable. And if we jump back to Airtable, notice if we go to our initialize content, there used to be 5 rows, now there's only 4. And if we come to our overview, we're not seeing anything, likely because there's no publish date. Go to schedule. We were working with C1. Now notice here, it's showing our text URL. So this is where you want to just keep continuing to update your UI. For now, I'm going to go ahead and continue to use the document. But again, I'll show you how to use the text as we go along as well if you want to go that route. But now we have a button that is enabled, and I can also show the folder instead of the URL. So we'll remove that, keep this here. And so now we have the document and the folder. And now this is a good time to recognize that we shouldn't really be scheduling content that hasn't even been initialized yet. So now we can come into our filter and we can do one of two things. I'll show you a little trick here that's actually kind of cool. So in all of these different views here, I can add a filter that's checking for both of these. Or you know what I could do is I could come here and I could create a field called initialized, and we'll make it a formula. And we can say if and open parenthesis, and we can say text URL is not equal to empty, comma, and the folder URL is not equal to empty. So basically we're saying if, and then we have this and wrapper, if the two values are not empty, if text URL is not empty and the folder URL is not empty, then return 1. Otherwise, return 0. So now we can see that this is initialized, whereas these are not. So instead of having to have a more complex filter, I can now use this one column here to determine whether something is initialized or not. And it makes the filter quite a bit more easy. I can just add initialized is equal to 1. So now we only show that. And now we're going to have to add that likely throughout the rest of the views here, and you can do that as you go. Now, this is not something that you probably want to show to the user, so you can go ahead and hide that. So now if I wanted to come here and initialize the rest of the rows here, one thing I can do is, because this is only triggered when a record enters the view, I could come back here to make, I could save it, I could turn it on, click save, come back to Airtable. Now what I could do is I could just add something to the filter to make sure something leaves. I could just turn this to an and I could say, and the content ID equals something that I know is not there, like test. Everything's going to leave the view. Then I could come back and simply correct it, remove this, turn it back to an or. Then what's going to happen is, actually before I do that, I'm going to open up another Airtable, going to go to the automations, going to rename this to Initialize Content. I'm going to turn it on, otherwise it wouldn't have run. Then I can come back here, and then when I apply this, we can actually come back to this view. When you're not in edit view, you can actually see this on this right-hand side here. We can actually see. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this filter. This automation in Airtable is going to run 4 times, and you're going to see here, they're all getting sent in, they're all getting initialized. And as that happens, they all start to fall out of this particular view. All right, guys, so now let's keep pushing forward. Now I'm going to talk a bit about how do we manage ideas. And I'm going to cover that in 2 different ways. One, where we add ideas directly into this system, or we do it through Slack. So I'm going to show you how to record audio notes into a channel on Slack, and then we'll bring those audio notes into Airtable, transcribe those notes, and then actually build out the content row with the document and all that stuff. Because what I like to do is I like to create as many different ways to add ideas to make that as easy as possible. So let's go ahead and add in another view. I'm going to call this view ideas. We'll move this up into the inbox. Now we may have to tweak this as we go and as we change things, but let's go ahead and start to map this out. So I'm going to go ahead and hide all of these columns and start to think, okay, if I'm coming up with content ideas, I really just need the description. This is where I can put in a content idea. If I wanted to add a new idea, I could just add it here, but I don't really want to see everything that's already been initialized and already being scheduled out. So here I'm going to come up to the filter and I'm going to say initialized equals 0. But when I do that, what's going to happen, this is going to run automatically. This filter is just looking for these things to be empty. So every time I add a new row, it's going to come in here, get initialized, and then get pulled out. But I may not really want to run this automation every single time I come up with an idea, because I'm burning through these automations here for ideas that I may never create. So I'm going to come back here, and then just to be true to form, I want to add that icon here. So I'm going to add this will be a light bulb for ideas. So in this case, what I might want to do is simply add a column here that will prevent the automation from going into initialize content. So if we put in here checkbox, we could call it something like schedule, and that would mean that it was more than just an idea. So if we added a bunch of ideas here and then clicked schedule, then we could use that schedule to actually consider it a real piece of content that we want to create. And then therefore we could also adjust our initialize field down here. So remember, we had this field that we added called initialized. So here in the initialized content, we could add a filter where we're looking for the schedule checkbox to be checked. Now in this case here, we have to do a group here because we need an and an order. Here, I'm going to add another group. These are ors, but this needs to be an and. So where schedule is checked and this got changed here, either of these are empty. You see how that works? So this needs to be checked, and this needs to be true. And in order for this to be true, one of these needs to be empty. So now I can add an idea here, and they're not going to show up here. I might also want to add an additional field here, which is, and also the description is not empty. So now we can start to see here how we can use these columns to create good workflow through our system. And it takes a little bit of thinking here. You have to stop and kind of think about how these different things are going to happen. And at different times, you might find that you need to adjust it. So we'll go ahead and save that as is. But now I can come in here, I can have ideas, put idea number 1, idea number 2, idea number 3, and so on. Again, I'll adjust these different columns. And you might also want to add some other columns here. Like let's add a created time. Then let's also add a modified time. And we might actually want to sort this by the created date and the last modified, because what can happen is you start to add a lot of ideas, older ideas you become less passionate about, and you want to keep an eye on those most recent ones. But then if you modify an old idea, you want it to pop up. Let's take a look here. We can sort by last modified and also the created, and we'll say the latest. So you can see here, if there's no modified date, we'll sort by the created date. So any of the ideas that are the most recent will bubble to the top. But then if we modified an idea, it's a good indication that that should rise to the top because we're interested in it again. So just another way to kind of start to think about these different things and how it actually plays out for the user and their experience. So there's the technical things behind all of this, but how is the user going to use this? How is it going to make sense and be easy? And so now you can also see again why this all data in all fields becomes important, because as we start to develop all these views, it's quite easy for something to disappear and you don't know why and you can't find it anywhere. But I can always come here and reference this and find whatever I need without having to adjust these other views to find it, which then really just kind of starts to destroy the user experience that you're trying to create here. So now one other thing to show you is, let's say you wanted to be able to easily add these ideas from your phone. You can install Airtable on your phone, but navigating through all of these different views on your phone isn't that easy. So one thing you can do is you can add a new form. I'm going to add a form view, new idea. So here we can actually create a form that we can just have a link to on our phone. And whenever we click that link, it's going to open up a new form and we can add that new idea. So this is really a form builder. This is not actually where you add the idea. This is a form builder. So we don't want to have all of these different fields here now when we're just trying to add an idea. It's just pretty overwhelming. You might not know the publish date. All of these other fields just don't make sense right now if it's just an idea. So we really just need this description. So I'm going to come here to remove all. Then I'll just add back the description. That's really all we need. You can add a logo if you want. You can put in a description, idea, form, and then you have a few different options down here. I'm going to turn off the Airtable branding, and then I'm going to come down here and just say, show a new blank form after 5 seconds in case I had a few different ideas. So that's the form. Now to actually access it, you click this link here, share form. It's going to give you this link, and this is the link that you could use on your phone, and it's going to show you this form, new idea, how to create a content system in Airtable. Submit. Thank you for submitting the form. And then remember, every 5 seconds, it's going to pop up again and let you do another one. But then if we come back to our Airtable database and come to ideas, we see that idea here. And then in your weekly workflow, you come into the inbox and your ideas, then you can sort through these. You can delete them. You can schedule. Once I schedule it, it should trigger the automation so that it creates the folder. And then it will actually drop itself out of this row, just like it did. And now we're going to see it in schedule. Now we could actually put a publish date, which would then push it to the in progress, right? You're starting to see how we established this workflow here. So now let's jump over to Slack and talk about how we could also add in ideas from voice notes, because if we're driving around and we don't have access to this new idea form, well, it would be much easier to jump into Slack. You could have the Slack on your cell phone. The way the app works is you can have the Slack app open like that, and then you would just jump in to the channel. I had this from a previous video I made in the past, Speak to Social. You jump into that channel. It's going to have a little microphone down here. You click that microphone while you're driving around, talk into it, and then it's going to add that audio into the channel here. and then we can process that audio. So now I'm going to go ahead and record some audio from my desktop, although I could just as easily do this from my cell phone, but because I'm on my desktop, I'm going to do that. Now, when I do this, I'm just going to talk from the top of my head, because this is what's really cool about doing audio notes, is that we can just talk from the top of our head. We don't have to make it perfect. We don't have to do it in any sort of structure. We can just talk from our top of our head, and then once it's into the system, we can use that, and we can use, ChatGPT or Claude to turn it into something that's more structured with a nice prompt. So let's give this a try. So one of the biggest struggles that I have seen with people that are building automations is that they don't really understand the thought process behind actually creating a good product, more than just an automation. How can they create an actual product that a user would want to use? They can create the technical background, but when they go to create the Airtable database, they don't really know how to structure the views and the filters and actually create a nice workflow, a nice user interface for their potential clients or their potential employees to actually use. So in order for you to create good automations, make sure that you understand Airtable from a user experience point of view so that you can create robust applications or actual products, or actually create systems inside your company that are user-friendly that people want to use. Because if you create automations that nobody wants to use because they're clunky, you can actually make something that is harder to use and it won't be adopted. So it's important to understand user experience and actually make the life of your customers or your employees or even yourself better, or all of the work going into the automations will go to waste. So once you have that in there and you're on your phone, even doing it from your desktop is a lot easier for some than to have to type all that out. Then we can go ahead and submit that. Now we've got that audio note in Slack, and now we can continue with the automation in Slack to bring that into the system where we can then schedule it and then run it through the rest of the workflow. All right, so now let's do the work to get that message in from Slack into Airtable. So I'm going to come over to create a new scenario. In this case, we're going to go with Slack. We're going to watch a private channel for new messages. And just so you know, this is a private channel that I'm putting these messages into so that the rest of the team can't see it. So we'll watch private channel messages. Now there is a better Slack trigger to use. This particular trigger is a on-demand trigger, so it's going to run at a specific interval, which is a bit of a pain, and it will also waste some of your automations long-term. It's a good way to get started. There is another type of trigger as well. Let me just show you that. In Slack, it's this instant trigger down here, watch new events. It just takes a bit longer to set up. So for this video, I'm going to go ahead and use the watch private channel messages. When I do release the community version of the Content Engine database, I will definitely have instructions for the instant trigger, but this works just fine and you'll have no problems with this at all. So I'm going to go ahead and select my Slack connection, select from a list, private channel, speak to social. We'll go ahead and limit it to 1. So this will only process 1 new message at a time. Click save. Now, typically the way this automation is going to work is that it's only going to find new messages. When you're doing testing, you're going to want to do choose manually. That way it's going to open up existing messages that you can click on. Click save, and then we can run this. Looks like it's got an error. Sometimes you just have to do that to get through. We'll run once. So we have that message here. It looks like it's got a file. So now we have that audio file. So now we need to download that file. And then we're going to pass in the URL from the previous module, open up the files, put in the private download, click save. Now, each time we test this, we need to go back to choose where to start, choose manually, and we need to reselect that. And that way we can test over and over and over again without having to come in and add a new audio file. Run once. All right, it's able to download the audio. So we've got that data. Now what we can do is we can pass that into ChatGPT Whisper, create transcription, and we can map in the file from this module here. We can go ahead and use Whisper, and we can leave the prompt blank, and the response format we can go ahead and leave as JSON. Again, it's showing some errors here. Go ahead and resave it to get rid of that. I haven't run this, but we can go ahead and add the Airtable. We're going to create a record here, pick the right connection, find your base, your table. All right, so for the description, it would actually be nice for ChatGPT to come up with a description. For the actual transcription, I'm going to use that text field that we added before, and I'll show you how I get that text into a document a little bit later. But for now, I'm going to drop that text that's coming out of the transcription right here. And then for the description, let's come back here. Let's add another ChatGPT module. We'll do create a completion, and we'll go ahead and use 4.0 mini. There's no reason to use anything bigger than that. We'll go ahead and add a message, user, and for content, we'll simply say, please create a short 10 words or less description from the transcription below. And then I'll actually put the transcription below right here. And that should be all we need. And then we can actually map that result back into the description. Here's the result here. Should be able to save this, save. Then I'm going to come back to the beginning, choose where to start, choose manually, object, save, run once, creating the transcription from the downloaded audio file. Now it's creating the description. Now it's created the record. So now if we come back to our system here and we go to ideas, all right, so we can see we have our idea here with the description. And then if we were to open up this row, we could also see that we have the description and also the transcription. And so now if we wanted to, we could schedule that, which would also initialize the content. Now, one thing we have to think about here is, remember when we added this, we dropped the transcription here in this text. So it's not in the document that we're about to create, which we want it there, because then we're going to want to be able to modify it or edit it manually or use that somewhere else. So then we need to go back to our original automation here. Right here, what we can do is we can put in this dummy text right here, or if we have that text field, what we can do is we can put that here instead. So we need to use a couple of different functions here. And what we can do is we can say, and this is pretty cool. So if you didn't know about this, there's all these other functions here. And I'm going to cycle through. I'm looking for the if empty. So what we can do is we can use the if empty function. And the way this works, you can always hover over these and understand how they work. But basically, it's going to return value 1 if the value is not empty. Otherwise, it's going to return value 2. So this is the value 2. We'll put this here. And then what we'll do is we'll go to Airtable, scroll down, and we'll use the text. So if there's something in the text, it's going to use that. Otherwise, it's going to give us this boilerplate text right here. So let's go ahead and save. And now I'm going to run once. The run once is really good for testing one thing at a time so that you can actually watch it go through. Now I'm going to come back to our automation here. I'm going to go to ideas. Now I should be able to schedule this. Jump back to the automation. So it's creating that document this time with the text itself because we had it. So let's jump back. So now it's out of the inbox or out of the ideas. It's going to be in schedule now. Now we have the text document, open that. And now we've got our transcription here. So you can see the thinking process, right? Using these views and these different columns in a really smart way to facilitate workflow. So now that we have this, let's start to get into some of the repurposing. All right, guys, so we're making great progress here. We've designed the content system and we are now capturing ideas both from a form and also voice notes. And if you're enjoying this video and you want access to the Airtable and Make.com blueprints, make sure to jump into the No Code Architects community. It's a thriving group. And beyond that, I'm actually going to be releasing a full and more complete version of this same database in just a few weeks inside of the community. And so now let's continue on. Now I'm going to show you how to actually build out a system for content repurposing. And not only am I going to show you how to actually repurpose the content, but more important than these actual transformations, I'm going to show you the system behind it that is very flexible that will allow you to add on to it later as you come up with other ways to transform and repurpose your content. So I'm going to jump back to our Airtable system. And now for the first time here, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to add another table. We're going to start from scratch and I'm going to call this transformations. Now remember here on this primary column here in this version here, or in this table here, we used a formula that was an auto ID. In this particular table, I'm going to leave it as a name, and I'm going to call this the transformation. And I'll explain a bit as to why, in this case, I use a text field, and in this case, I'm using this ID. Now I might still create an auto ID field. So I'm going to come down here because it's always nice to have a field that you know for sure. Again, I'm going to call it auto ID. It's nice to know that you have a column with an ID in it that is unique and you can always count on that. But in this case, it's also nice to have a text field here because when I come over here and I'm in overview, I'm going to add another field here. I'm going to add it here. In terms of workflow, there might be a better place to put it, but this is going to be pretty good. I'm going to link to another record. We're going to link to the transformation record. I'm going to turn this off. We're going to only allow one. And I'm going to type transform. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to call this action because it's not always going to be a transformation. I'm going to add some lookup fields later, but I'm going to come back. I'm going to rename this to actions. And then this will be action. And now let's say I want an action that turns a transcript to article. So it's nice to have that as text here because in the linked field, when I go here, it's going to give me actual text. If it was just an ID, you can imagine it wouldn't be as user-friendly. So in this case, it's nice because here I'm going to be able to add this action. Like here we have our C15. Where did that go? Schedule. So we're going to schedule this for the 11th. So it shows up in overview. Here it is. So now let's say we have this text here and we want to actually run this action, transcript to article. If it were an ID, we wouldn't be able to do that. I have gotten in the habit of doing something else. If we have two of these, transcript to article. Now you might ask, well, why would there be two of the same thing? Well, in this case, it doesn't really make sense, but you will find situations where you actually name it the same thing when you're using these kind of lookup tables. So what I might do actually is I'm going to create another formula. We'll call this action. I'm going to just put this X here because I'm going to change the column names and I won't be able, if I name it action, I won't be able to add it. I'm going to come down here to formula. I'm going to add action and then I'm going to put an ampersand, put a space in there with a bracket, and then I'm going to put in the auto ID, an ampersand and the auto ID, and then an ampersand, close bracket. So now what we're going to see is we have the name, but we also have the ID right here. So then I can move this over here, and then we can have the name here. I'm going to rename this to action name, and then I can go back and add this and just change it back to action. So you can see here I'm pretty particular about all of these things from experience. And now I can hide these. And now what would we want to do here? Well, we'd want to start to add some sections. I'm going to add two sections. This one is going to be all data and all fields, right? Just consistency, right? Your users are going to appreciate the consistency. I'm going to move this new idea here. All of this little work that I'm showing you is what makes all the difference between something that's kind of janky and something that's pro. Move this here. Move this up here, change this to other. You can just change this to actions. This isn't really all data and all fields, is it? We got to expose everything. Then I'm going to duplicate this and move that up here, and we'll just call this all actions. Now you could do something kind of cool where maybe you have a checkbox here, which is active. Maybe we have a bunch of transformations and at some point we don't want one of them because we don't want it to show up here. Maybe we disable one for a while or we're not using it anymore. So we can use this view here to show active actions. Filter. Active actions is on. Now we're showing just the active one, so I can turn one off. And then I could duplicate this. Disabled actions. Let me change the filter, right, to unchecked. So now we have the disabled ones and the active ones, and we can start to hide the things that we don't need to see. I don't need this notes, but we could leave the notes. Maybe that's helpful. Don't need an assignee on this. Don't need a status. Don't need to see the pieces of content that this is attached to. Just so you know, since this table here is linked to content, you can see it from both sides. We can see what it's linked to from the content side, and then from the action side, we can see it's C15, right? So C15. But we don't really need to see that from here. It doesn't add any value to the user. We need it technically, but the user doesn't need to see it. Pay close attention to column widths. You can add notes here, describe what this does. This will take a text transcription and convert it to an article. And then the final thing is coming back to the content, and we got this view here, but if I come here, remember, it's showing all of them. Remember, I only want it to show the active, but we can do that. Come here, edit field, limit to a view, active actions, and now we only see the active ones, which is really cool from a user perspective, right? One of the biggest things I wanted to show you guys here is how do you build an application that a user can use that's nice and user-friendly. This is how you go from just a simple database that's just a spreadsheet to a powerful application. Now let me show you some even more cool stuff. So this is the actual action, but how do we tie it back to an automation? Well, if you remember here, we have this webhook. The first thing it does is it pulls up that record ID. Now what we can do is we can come back to our database and we can add a single line text here. Actually, we could add a URL and we can call it webhook URL. So now in our case, what we're going to do is we're going to continue to pass the same webhook URL for all of these different actions. Again, remember we could branch off based off of this router. If you want to, you can separate these different actions into different automations. You would just need to copy the right webhook. So imagine you had this automation right here. This is automation 1. If you made automation 2 on a different page, it's going to have a different webhook URL. And then you would just copy that into the section here. So you could have multiple actions here. So we're going to create a few other automations. Let's just add them. So we're going to do text to video, AI video. We'll say AI video. And then we're also going to do text to graphic. So now if one of these automations was super complex and you just wanted it in its own automation, then you could do that. You just create a new automation and then you would create a new webhook and you would copy that webhook into this section here. I'm going to take this and just publish it all the way down. And we're just going to use different routes as we go. So now I could also come back here and we've got our action name here. So that's fine. We can just pass that along. We'll actually pass the auto ID, I think, as the action. Remember when we come through here, we had this action here. We'll pass that through in the action. We'll just pass the ID. So long term, I would probably be a little bit more consistent there. For now, you'll see what I'm about to do. So then what I would do is I would come back here. And so that our content table has access to the webhook and then also this ID that's hidden, I'm going to come back to the content. I'm going to go to this action here. I'm going to add lookup fields. I'm going to pass in the webhook and also the auto ID. So what that's going to do is it's going to add these two fields here. So when I have the action here, it brings those values from the other table. If I'm patching this in, it's going to bring in this here, and it just makes it convenient. So now I have these values here and I can hide these. The user doesn't need to see it. But what that allows us to do is now we can add the action on the back end. So now what we can do is we can come down here to the automations. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this view and we're going to change this to run action. And now in this case, what we want to do is we want to run this action when the action is not empty. So all of these really don't matter. We probably do want to make sure it's initialized. So let's go back and make sure it's initialized is equal to 1, right? But all of these other ones we can just get rid of. Now we want to add one more where the action itself is not empty. So now there's only one here. And so again, make sure that you're showing the columns. So actually I should come back here and show more columns, right? Because we're doing schedule, description. Right now we're only showing these two. So we should really show schedule and also, what was the other one? Description, because these are all being used in the filter. So I like to show them in the filter here. So in run action, we're going to also add initialized an action. So let's hide all. And then we want to come back to action and also initialized. So now we can come back to our automations. What's going to be the easiest is just to duplicate this. We're going to call this run action. Here we're going to come and we are going to change the trigger from content, initialized content to the run action. And then we're going to come and modify our script. So we have the record ID here. So now remember in this one, the action was hard coded into the URL. Now this one's more dynamic, right? It could be any action. So beyond the record ID and the webhook, we need to also add the auto ID field. So if we come back here, remember in our action here, number one, the webhook URL here is dynamic. It's not hard coded like the original one was. Remember we copy and pasted this URL here. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to edit the code. We're going to add a variable. We'll call this the auto ID. because that's what it is. Then we're going to come here. We're going to go to the trigger. We're going to just type auto ID. It's there now. And then for the webhook, instead of having this hard-coded value, we're going to pass that in. So we're going to come here. We're going to type webhook. And we're going to pass in the value. So now it's going to pass in the record ID that's right here. Run action. Going to pass in the record ID for this record. Then we're also going to pass in the auto ID that is coming from the action here. So I'll show it. Here it is. The column will show you too. Auto ID from action, right? It's telling you it's coming from here because it's a lookup field. Come back to our automation. Now the only thing is we need to adjust the action here so that it's not hard coded. So we're going to take these parameters. Let's just copy it. And I'm going to erase this up until the equal sign. Going to add the ampersand. And now this time I'm going to type params and we'll change it to auto ID. So we're good there. It's showing this as if there's an error. And I see why we can't use an ampersand here. It's a plus. So that takes care of that. Now I'm going to finish editing. I'm going to update the automation. Make sure you update it because if you don't, it's going to use what's already there when you test it. So now we have to come here and pull in a record. It's not showing anything. So let's come back to run action. Why is it not showing anything? I see what I did there. I just modified the wrong automation and basically broke it. So what I'm going to do here to fix that is I'm going to duplicate this one because this is actually right. I'm going to delete this one that I was going to set up. I'm going to call this one run action. And then I got to go back to Initialize Content and fix this. See, even I make mistakes. Going to copy this URL back. Erase the auto ID. So that should get us back. And now I have to go back here and erase this, and we have to put Initialize Content back here. So now I fixed that one. Now I can come back to run action, change this to run action. And now when we choose a field, we'll see something. Now we have that row. And again, because that's here, right? It's in this view. So fix it. So again, notice what I did there. I made the mistake here, but since I actually created it, before I fixed it, I duplicated it. So now I don't have to fix this one again. So I'll just double check everything is right here. Looks good. I'll turn this on, come to our automation. I'm just going to run it once, and then I can trigger the code here, test, jump back to make. So it comes in, and again, remember we get that initial record because all of these paths, no matter how many we create, they need to get that data from the record we're working with so that I don't have to have each of those here just duplicated. We do it once and then they can all use the same module here. So let's open up, what do we got here? We got the record ID and we have the action 15. So now here, what we can do is we can add a filter. Action equals 15, right? Our text data in this particular example is really in two places. Remember, we put it in the text field here from the notes, right? So we can use it here or we can use the document. Now, I prefer the documents. And the reason why is because they're more shareable, especially if you want other people to review it. And it just has everything that a document normally has. It has spell check, you can do all sorts of things. It has all of the added benefits. If you're going to edit a large article, it's going to be far better here. So this is how I do it. But I did want to show you that you can do it here as well. But I'm going to continue forward as if we're using the text document. So in our automation here, the first thing that I need to do is to get the contents from that document. So now in order to get the text from the document, we need to load the document. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to go to Google Docs and I'm going to say, get the contents of a document. I'm going to make sure I have the right connection so I don't make the same mistake. And now it's asking us for the document ID. When I start to think about this, I'm like, oh wait, I don't really have the document ID. I only have the URL that I saved. So if we come back here, remember in our structure, all data, all fields, here's the folder URL and here's the text URL, but I don't have this ID in here. So how do I get that? Well, there's a bunch of different ways. What I like to do is I like to create another field here. I'm going to insert to the right. I'm going to call it doc ID. I'm going to come down here to formula. And in the formula here, I'm going to copy this in and you can just copy it. So just pause the video and copy this exactly as I have it here, or jump into the No Code Architects community and get the script and the templates where all this will be filled out for you. I'm going to erase that placeholder that I had right there. And I'm simply going to type in text URL. So I'll take a second and let you grab that. Copy it exactly as it is or it will break. And then I'm going to create this field and there we go. So when there's nothing there, it errors out, but that's not an issue. But now we have that doc ID. But just so you know, that's not going to exist yet because when we ran this, the doc ID didn't exist yet. I believe we can actually reload it. If I come here and I come to this content and I refresh, you have to do it a couple times. Notice how when it does that little flip there, that's usually when it actually reloads it. I'll click save. If I come back here, let's see if it's there. It's not there, okay? So I need to cancel. I need to save. I might not be able to run this. It's going to cause an error. So I'm going to just put in a dummy ID here so that it lets me save it and not error out. Save. I'm going to run once. Now I got to come back to my automation and trigger it again. Come back to make. It's going to error out because I put in that fake ID. So now if I come here though, come back here. Now that doc ID is there. I can put it in there. Now we can actually load the document. So now we're going to have the text. So now what I can do is I can go and add Claude. I'm going to add Claude in this case. Actually, I'll just keep with ChatGPT to keep it simple. But if you liked Claude, you could just as easily do that. Create a completion model. This time I'm going to use 4.0. Let it think a little bit better. Going to add a message, role, user, text. Then we can just say review the text below and rewrite it into a structured article using all the details and my tone of voice and style. Simply restructure the contents for impact for the reader. And then I would simply put the text below because I said review the text below. So now I'm going to put the text. So there we go. And now all we need to do is then it's going to have a results. And so we now need to update the document. So for updating, actually what you want to do is instead of going to Google Docs doesn't actually let you do it. It lets you append or do a search and replace, but it doesn't just let you replace the entire contents. So I'm going to go to Google Drive. And here what you want to do is use update a file. And make sure you're using the right connection. So for the file ID, we can just use the same file that we used here. That's going to be the doc ID, new updated file name. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in the file name from where it was because it is a required field. So I'm just going to pass in the title. So it's basically just going to update the title with the title. And then we're going to change the file contents. Actually, I think we can leave this empty and I'll put the file name here. So grab the title, put it there. And then for the data, we're going to pass in the results from ChatGPT. And click save. And now we don't actually necessarily need to update Airtable at all. And what I mean by that is we don't need to update Airtable because we're actually updating the document. But let's just pretend we wanted that text in Airtable as well. But there's another reason why as well. We might want to adjust the status of the text field. Remember here, we've got all of those statuses, right? So we might want to move the text status to needs review. So let's go ahead and add this even though we don't have to have it. Update a record, community, table, content, record ID. We'll pull that from that first step. We got that record ID coming in from the webhook. We can leave the description alone. I'm going to update the text from here. Scroll down. So this is just doubling up on the text again, whether you want it in a text field or in a document. It's really up to you and your design. We don't need to change the text URL, but here I'm just going to change the text status. I'm going to turn off the map here so it pulls up the dropdown. We'll go with needs review, and then we're good to go. Now, the only other thing that we should do here, and we can either do it here or we can do it in Airtable, but I might do it here just because if we do it in Airtable, it won't necessarily know whether this was successful or not. But remember, we set this action here, but when it's done, it should clear it out. So from Airtable or from make, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the action here. And now it's a little bit tricky, but if you turn on this map, we can put in, I'm going to come to the variables over here. I think it's the string. And I'm going to put empty string. And then I believe it'll clear it back out. So I'm going to click save. I'm going to run once. We have our automation here. And here it is. So let's give this a test. Let's send it to make. All right, so we had an error here. So what error did we get? I think I probably have the wrong connection again. Save. Run once. Trigger. Pulling up the document. Now we're creating the article, updating the document, and updating Airtable. So if I come back here, notice it's not in the run actions anymore because we cleared out the action. So let's come back to overview. Now the text status is in needs review. And if we open up the document, it actually turned it into an article. And what's always cool about this too is that with these text documents, if you come up to file, you can always go back and check out the version history. I've always thought this was pretty cool with Google Docs. Another good reason to use it, right? So we can see this was the blank doc that we created. here's the actual transcript, and now here's the edited version. So that's why I like to use documents myself. And you could read through this, and then of course you could start to update the prompt. All right, cool. So we're moving along here. Let's create some AI videos with our AI avatar in HeyGen. Oh, and also make sure to stick around the end, and I'll also talk a bit about publishing content in the system and also auto publishing, in case you're interested in that. But let's get into the AI avatar videos. Now, one thing I want to talk a little bit about is these content rows here. We have C15, which is really becoming an article, right? But now this could just as easily be a video, of course, right? If we took this out, this could be a video. Maybe we'd want to restructure it a little bit. Maybe not. Maybe it would be just as fine to publish it just as is. But it does beg the question, if we were to create a video, would we want to add the video to this particular CID and add it here? And then when we wanted to publish it, we could use the same CID to publish articles to a place like Medium or our blog or wherever that was. And then we could also use the same CID to publish the video. And we just do it in two separate actions. Or do we want to have two separate rows here that represent two different types of content? One is an article and one is a video. Now, in all reality, there's not one right answer to this. In my more advanced systems, I actually have another tab here, which is called posts. Those posts are related to a single piece of content. So we could take this one piece of content, but we would have two different post rows referencing this same piece of content that we're posting to two different places. So you could do it that way, or you could just use one row, or you could duplicate the row. And there's also multiple ways of duplicating the row as well. So I could just simply duplicate this, and then Airtable is going to copy everything, and then it's going to give it a new CID. Now, there is a slight disadvantage in this in that now these two rows are using the same document and also the same folder. Now that could be an issue or it might not. It all kind of just depends on how you want to build out your system. I've kind of developed my own principles behind that. Now, if that doesn't bother you, and it shouldn't necessarily bother you, right? This is an important part about automations, is that sometimes our brains tell us that we need to do things a certain way, but we don't. We can do things the way we want, and we can keep things simple and work with them until they don't work. So maybe you do it this way for a while, and then you run into some sort of engineering issue that makes it so that you need to create different folders and different documents when you want to copy C15 to C16. Now, I'm not going to build out this particular automation because I think you're going to find that it's actually quite simple to do. It's pretty much going to be a copy of this. But let's say you wanted to actually have an automation that recreated the document and also recreated the folder when you duplicated it. So instead of actually using the duplicate content row, you could just come to your actions and you could add another action, clone content, and then you would simply move this down, and then you would just come to your automation here and you would create a new path based off of the action ID that would simply create a new folder. It would duplicate the document. It would create a new row in the database, and it would update it with the new information. So you can think a little bit about that and how you want to build that out, because there's really three options. You create a whole other post table where one CID, C5, could go to post ID 1 and post ID 2. So it's using the same content, but we differentiate it by where it's going to. This one could go to LinkedIn, and this one could go to, say, TikTok, but it's referencing the same piece of content. Or you could simply use Airtable to duplicate C5 to C6, which is really the easiest way. The only disadvantage is they are both linking to the same document and the same folder, which may or may not really actually be an issue. And then this one can go to LinkedIn, and then this one could go to TikTok when it actually has a video in the field there. Or you have that final option where you use make to do the duplication, and you trigger that automation and you recreate a new document and a new folder, and then you create a new row and you simply copy that stuff into that new one, and then you would have a new one that's independent. So for this example, I'm going to go ahead and continue on using the Airtable duplicate function here. And now we have a new row where we can actually create the video from the contents of our document. Now, I am going to come in here and I'm going to make this script quite a bit smaller, because the time it takes to generate the AI video is determined by how long the script is. Because this is more about setting up the systems than producing the perfect video, I'm going to create a very short script so that when I create the video, it produces it a lot faster. Now to create the AI avatar, I am going to use this service HeyGen. I do believe you can create a few videos for free. They are just going to have a watermark on that video, which makes it so that you can't actually publish it. But if you like what you see, then you can go ahead and buy an API subscription, and then you can go ahead and set this up. The only thing that you actually have to add in is you'll have to create an avatar. You'll have to record a video and upload it so that it can use your own avatar when it creates a video. Now you can create videos through their interface here, but I'm going to do it through the API. As we've been doing, I'm going to create that and add a new route here. And then that way we can actually do it all automated. And then to access your API key, you can come into your accounts, subscriptions. You can come to the HeyGen API, and this is where you can grab your API token. So now let's come back to Airtable and actions, and we have our text to AI video. And this happens to be auto ID number 4. So I'm going to come to our make automation. I'm going to remove some of these documents here, and I'm going to add a new route, auto align, add in the action equals to 4. And I'm actually going to copy this, clone it, because we're going to use that. It looks like I got rid of our filter and put it here. So I'm going to remove that, add the action back, action 4, because remember, we're going to want to load in the contents of the document if we're using the document. In this case, I am. Now what we need to do is we need to make an API call to HeyGen. Now there is a HeyGen module. I haven't actually played around with it too much. I want to use the webhook, and I was looking around here for the exact thing that I needed. I didn't see it at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and just use a traditional HTTP module. We're going to make an HTTP request. This is actually quite easy to use as well. I'm going to copy this over from another automation that I have and just copy it back and forth just to make this process easy. It's a post. We need 2 headers here. We need an accept and application JSON, accept and application JSON. We need to put our X API key, copy this in here. Then for body type, we're going to use raw, content type, JSON, application JSON. And now we need to copy in the request content. So I'm going to copy this from this module here and paste it here. And you're going to want to copy this exactly as I have it here. I'm going to try to expand this as best as I can, but you can stop the video and copy everything that I have here just as I have it. If you get one tiny thing wrong, it's not going to work. Just know that I'm actually copying this in here as we go. So what I have here will work. If it's not working, it just means that there's something that's slightly off, and you can just come and just study it and make sure you got it. So for the avatar ID, I'm going to go ahead and erase this. For the input text, I'm going to erase this placeholder. Same goes for the voice ID. We'll leave the dimensions as is. For the callback ID, I'm going to remove that as well. And for the callback URL, I'm going to remove this as well. And again, remember, if you just want to get access to these make automations and this Airtable database without having to copy it from this YouTube video, feel free to jump inside the No Code Architects community. You'll find it inside the automation vault. What I recommend doing is just copying it as I have it and then coming back and filling these things in. So for the avatar ID, I'm going to come back to HeyGen. I'm going to come to my account. I'm going to go to my avatars, and then I can go into the avatar. Here's my avatar, and then I can copy the avatar ID, come back to the automation. I'll put the avatar ID right there. And now I can come to the text input, and that's going to be the text from our document here. So I'm going to come here and put text content. Notice I'm putting these placeholders in between the quotes here. Now for voice ID, I'm going to come back to HeyGen, and you can come to your AI voice. Now I've actually used 11 Labs to build a better sounding voice, but you could also come here. If you uploaded a video, it's also going to have the voice ID that was generated from HeyGen, but I'm going to use the one that I built in 11 Labs, copy that voice ID. But again, remember, if you upload an avatar, you'll have the avatar and it will also make a voice ID that you can copy here. Okay, but I'm just using one that I imported from 11 Labs. Get that voice ID, I'll put that here. And then the final 2 things we need is the callback ID. So what we're going to do here is we're going to pass in the record ID of the row we're working with. Because what's going to happen here is we're going to send this to HeyGen, but it's going to take a few minutes for it to generate. And then when it's done, they're going to send it back to a URL that we're also going to give them. But in order to know which row we're working with, we need that record ID. So we're going to pass that here. I'm going to scroll down, strap in this record ID. And then for the callback URL, we're going to have to come over to Airtable. We're going to come to automations. We're going to create a new automation down here. And this time we're going to see all, and we're going to create a webhook when webhook received. And then it's going to give us this URL. We're going to copy that. We're going to take it and we're going to drop it into the callback URL right here. And everything should be good. I'm going to go ahead and just parse response. That's going to make a JSON coming out of it. And everything here should be good. So I'm going to go ahead and click save. I'm going to save the automation. I'm going to scroll back a bit. I'm going to run it once. I'm going to come back to Airtable. I'm going to turn this on. Actually, you won't be able to turn it on yet. We need to run this and actually test the trigger first. So I'm going to come to Airtable. This is already on, so when we add the trigger, it should fire. Going to go to the overview. We've got C16 here. And again, this is where we put in a much shorter bit of text to generate the avatar. So now we can go to the action. We can go text to AI video. This is going to trigger the automation, jump to make. We'll watch it go through. All right, so it didn't actually go down our path. So let's check out what happened there. So the action ID was 16. Let's come back to here and see what's going on there. Actions. So this is interesting. We're getting action 16 when this was 4. So what's happening there? So I'm going to come to content here. I'm going to come down to all data, all fields. And we have our action ID. And we have the right auto ID here. That means in our script, in the run action, we're actually sending the wrong value here. So let's take a look and see what happened there. Oh, I see what I did. I'm passing the auto ID from the content tab instead of the auto ID that we pulled in from that other value. So I'm going to type auto ID. So again, remember, this was the auto ID from the content table, which is 15. So if I come back here, we ran this on C16 and this automation here was 16. So it's just a matter of changing this to this auto ID and the value here. Update. Now we can come back to make. Let's run this automation again. Come back here. Let's take this back out so it leaves that view. Let's come back to overview and we'll add the action back in again. And now let's do text to AI video, jump back to make. Should come down this path this time. Now it did. We got the document. We made the call to HeyGen. It responded status code 200. That's good. So if we jump over to HeyGen, my guess is if we go to our avatar videos or actually to home projects, refresh, there we go. So now we can see it's actually generating that video. And let's go ahead and wait for that to finish because when it's done, it's going to send a request to our automation here, this webhook that we sent it. So once it's done, it's going to send us that video right here. Actually, I think it's going to send us a couple things. I think it's going to send us a video and a thumbnail. We'll see that come through in just a minute, but we do need to wait for this to finish. All right, so it does look like it finished here. So let's jump back to Airtable. And we do have a response coming into our webhook. Let's take a look at it. So again, notice here, it's the avatar GIF. So I think this is where they send you an actual GIF. It's not the video. It's more just like a thumbnail. So I'm going to test this trigger once more and let's take a look at this one. Yeah, so this is the one we want to look for, the video success. So now that we have that, we can open this up. There's our video. So now what we need to do is we need to update the row. And so now you can see we have that callback ID. There's our record ID that we passed. So now we know which record to update. So now I'm going to come here, update record, which table? We're going to update the content table, record ID. Well, it's going to be here in our event data. Pass in the callback ID. And now all we need to do is go to our video and we're going to insert the URL from the video right here. Set run as configured, run test. Don't worry about that. That's not an actual error. It just can't render the video in this view. So it looks like it was successful. Come back to our content. And now we've got a video there. We can click on that and here's our video. One of the most significant challenges I've observed among individuals developing automations. All right, so moving along, notice here we also have that action here. So what we would also want to do is update this record, choose field, we're going to type action, and we're going to just leave it blank so it clears it out. So if I were to run this again, come back to the data, notice it's going to clear out that action so we could run a different, we could either clone the data, now we can turn text to graphic or text to AI. We can run this again over and over and over again. on the same row, or we can duplicate rows, however we really want to do it. All right, so let's keep going. Now that we have the AI avatar complete, let's move on to the next transformation or action, which is going to turn written content into a graphic. In this case, I'm going to use this platform called Placid, where you can create these different templates. I've got these different projects that I've made in the past. I'm going to come into social graphics, and you can see here that we have these kind of tweet pics that can mimic a Twitter post. And you've probably seen these on social media where it looks similar to a Twitter post, but it's captured into an image. So we're going to create a transformation that will take our written content and create this image. And I believe you can get access to a free account in order to get through this project. But I also want to touch on something at the end of this video here. And I want to show you the free NCA Toolkit. It's a completely free open source project that allows you to launch your own API server on a cheap platform like DigitalOcean for just a few bucks a month. I'll show you more about it at the end, but you would be able to also replace the Placid app. You wouldn't actually have to have a subscription to this. It also does a bunch of other things like captioning videos and doing transcriptions, all sorts of stuff. Stick around to the end and I'll show you. But let's go ahead and continue forward with this. So let's just double check. Let's come to our actions. I believe we already added in our text to graphic. So that's good. So now we can come up to Airtable, add another route. So this is going to be for our social graphic from text. So I'm going to go ahead and clone this as well, because I know that it's going to mess with the filter if I do it first. So I'm going to come in here. What's the ID? This is 5. So I'm going to add that here. Action. We'll make that 5. Now we're going to create a single image, but it would be just as easy to create a carousel from this as well. So we could create 5 different images and put them together into a PDF, or leave them as images for a platform like Instagram. Basically, you can create these little graphics here, and then for any of these text fields, you can assign this as a template so that we can then fill this in with automated text. I'll show you how to build out the template in just a minute, but we'll go ahead and use this for the demo. So this is going to come down this path, and then we are going to load up the document. So now what we need to do is we need to use ChatGPT to take that long document and convert it into something that's more like a single tweet that we can put here. Now, another thing that you could do is you could create a lot of these, and we could create a lot of different rows here, right? We could turn this entire document here, which I shrank down for the video creation, but if we come back down here to revisions, we can revert back. So one thing we could do is, instead of just trying to create one picture, we could create a bunch, and then we could create a bunch of different CIDs for each one. So that would be an option. And of course, you could just follow the instructions here for creating new folders and documents, and you could just create a loop. So that'll definitely be something that I add into the community version when we launch that in the No Code Architects community. But for this video, I'm going to just create a single image and then attach it back to our image field here. So let's go ahead and continue. So this is going to come down this path. We're going to grab the document. Now we need to use ChatGPT. We're going to pick a model. Let's go ahead and use 4.0. You can experiment with which one you want to use. 4.0 mini would probably work just fine. I'm going to add a message, user. So for the text content here, I'm just going to say, read the text below and create a powerful 10-word tweet like sentence that we can embed on a image template. And then I'll put the text below, just like that. So we're going to get a result that we can then put into our tweet pic. So now I'm going to go and use the Placid module. We're going to create an image. I've already got a connection, so you'll need to create an account and add that connection, and then you can select a template. So I'm not seeing the template that I wanted, and the way they've done this is they have each connection is connected to a specific project. So if I back out here, each project they have here is a different connection. So let's see if I have a different connection here, but just so you know, so you can see I have a different connection that's connected to social media graphics, which is this one right here. So when you create a new project, you'll tie a connection when you create it specifically to that. So if I come into social graphics here, you grab the API token here, and it would give you access to the templates there. So now that I have the right connection, I'm going to come to the templates. I'm going to grab the square carousel. And then in this case, it's only going to give us access to replace one piece of text because that's all our template allows. So if I come back into this, you can see we have multiple text elements here, but only this one is actually a element that we can replace. This section up here actually looks like an image that I had created in something like Canva. So I brought that in from Canva, and then I simply added in a text field below here. And the way you make it a template or not is if you see this little mark there, that's how you turn it into a dynamic element or a fixed element. So if you add text and it's not showing up in your template, you need to turn that on, and then it's going to come up as a dynamic element, which will allow it to show up here in your make automation. So if I refresh here, notice it's giving us that section here to do a text. But I believe if I came and actually turned that off, it might take a second for the system to recognize it, but I believe if I refresh here, and then I were actually to refresh these templates as well, there you can see that text field disappeared. So then I'll go back here, turn this back into an element that is dynamic. We'll save it, come back to make, we'll refresh the templates. Now we can put the result of ChatGPT into that. And then this is going to respond back with an image. And so now I'm just going to update the Airtable database, pick the base and the table, record ID. We're going to grab that from the webhook. Now all we need to do is come down to the image here. We're going to add the image. We're going to add the file URL here. We're going to have the image URL. We're just going to pass that right in. And now we're just going to update the image status. I'm going to turn the map off. Then we can put needs review. Go ahead and click save, run once. Let's jump back to our Airtable database. Make sure that this document has everything in it. Let's close these up. Now I should be able to run the text to graphic. Should come down this path here, grabs the document, creates the tweet. Now it's creating the image. We update Airtable. Jump back to Airtable. Now we've got the image here. We can open that up. And then we've got a quote from that original transcript that we put into Slack. User experience turns automations from clunky to captivatingly useful. Cool. And so again, if we wanted to, instead of just creating this action here where we do text to graphic, we could also do text to 10 graphics, right? Let's just go ahead and build it out. Why not? It's easy enough. Let's go ahead and just select all of these. I'm going to copy them. We'll paste. I'll just get rid of this one. Reconnect it up here. The ID is 7. So we'll filter on action as 7. We'll go ahead and save it. Actually, let's just create 4, mostly just because it's easier and it's not going to take as long, but you can change that. You'll see. So in this case, what we'll do, since we're going to create new records, I'm going to use this. So we have the text. So where does the loop start? We have the text, so we'd really want the loop to start right here, right? So we'll add a module. Let's add a repeater. Okay. Initial value is 1, repeats 4 times because that's what we put here. 4. Now you can make it 10, 20, whatever you want. Now it's going to repeat this section. So now in this case, if it's going to create new graphics, we could add them all here. So that's an option. Oh, notice we didn't clear that out. So let's just fix that real quick. So here we would need to come down to the action, change the map, and put in an empty string. Save. That's good. So here what we would do, in this case, let's just create new records. So this is going to create new records. And right here, it would do the same work. So it's going to take this document and it's just going to loop through the same thing each time. And it's going to create the image. This time what we'd want to do is create new records. So I'm going to delete this. And before we create the record, we would want to create a folder and a document potentially. So I'll just kind of show you that so you have that experience. So we'll create the new folder, create the new document. Do we need to change anything here? I don't think we will. We don't have the content ID yet. So interesting, what we need to do is because the content ID is in the folder name, first I'm going to remove this filter. It came from the copy here. So I'm going to remove that. Then we're going to create the record first. Content. And then we can just pass in what was in the other module, description. We can even keep the publish date if we want. If we didn't, remember it would go back to the inbox, which you might want to do, right? So if you left out the publish date, remember our rules state that would then send it back to schedule, which is actually what you might want to do. This one might be scheduled, but you might not want all of them published on the same day. Won't worry too much about those technicalities for now. We'll copy the text. Kind of have to think through what you actually want to copy over. So we're not going to put the text URL in there because we're going to create a new document. We're not going to pass in the folder ID because we're going to do the same there. So that should be good. So we can save that. Now here, we're going to want to pass in, notice this is referencing module 3, which is here. which is the old one. So we want to change that to our new one, content ID underscore description. And then our document right here, we're going to change this to content ID. In this case, we don't need this logic that we created earlier in the beginning. We just want to copy it directly from the text. So I'll take this out. Actually, I'm going to use the text that's actually in the document. So I'm going to remove all that, grab the text from the document here. Good. Folder ID, it's coming from that. That's correct. So now all we need to do is then update the record we just created with these new values. Base, community, table, content. We've already put in a few of these values already. Now we just need the text URL, which is the web link. Grab this here, put it into the text URL, and then we got the folder right here. There we go. This action is not the original, so we still need to clear this action. Oh, didn't put the record ID, so we need the record ID here from the create row. So we got that ID right there. Good to go. So now all we need to do is just update the record to remove the action that we're going to set, remember? So we'll come back here, clone this, bring it over at the end, and simply remove the image ID because we're not doing that. And one other thing I forgot is we created all these images, but we didn't put them anywhere. So just hang with me. Gonna turn this off. We don't need to update the image status of the original because remember, in this case, we've got this. We had the original, which is C15, and this one's going to create a bunch of new, 17, 18. So we don't need to set the status here. We need to set these statuses. This is what we wanted here. Perfect. Just going to come back here to the create record. We forgot to save the images, image URL, pass it in here. And then we can set the image status to needs review. Now we're good to go. Let's save it, back out a little bit, run once. Going to come to our C15. This time we're going to use text to for graphics. Something didn't happen. It's because I didn't copy the webhook URL. Let's try that again. Text to for graphics, grabbing the document, GPT, make an image 1, creating record number 1. Let's take a look at these as these are created. So we got C17, got the new document, got the folder, got the new tweet, got a new tweet here, and we're just going to keep going as it loops through the automation. So we've created the second, now it's on to the third. So you see here, in this repeater, we could create as many as we wanted. So this will just take a few more seconds to run. So it's created all 4 images. Now we've got all 4 of the new rows here, all duplicates of each other, except they all have their own document, their own folder, which is what we were kind of talking about before. And they're all in needs review, and they're all separate images. All right, cool. So then in Placid, if you were to go about doing that from the very beginning, then all you need to do is create a new project. So you would add a new project. You could title it whatever you want. You can leave it on API. That works just fine. Create that project. This is where you're going to access the API key, and then you can create a new template. And you can pick the size of that template. They already have a bunch here. Just grab this one. And then you can build your template here. If you want to put in a image that's similar to a tweet pic, you can just design that here in Placid, or you can build that somewhere else in like Canva. And then you simply have this text box here, which is a template. Remember, we talked about these dynamic fields here. So in this one, it actually has 2 layers that you can update. We have the author and the quote. So I'm assuming that this here is the author here. So you would just create those, and then in your make automation, you would access the project and the template, and then you would simply replace the sections that you wanted to replace. All right, cool. So we're making progress. Now we're through the written content. Now let's talk a little bit about publishing content and auto-publishing content. So I'm going to jump back to Airtable here. And so far we have this in progress section. So I'm going to add one more section, which is publish. And here I'll go ahead and just use a checkbox for this. And I'll move this section up below. And I think what I'll do is I'll just copy an existing section, duplicate view, and then move it down. Now, if you imagine what you want here, and I guess we can put a calendar or something, ready to go, or maybe the calendar would go here and the checkbox would go there, either way. So now that we're publishing, we don't need the action here, right? So let's move that away. We're not going to be changing things now, but we would want easy access to the document. We would want easy access to the title. but the statuses should already be all approved. So we don't really need these here, but we do need to change the filter. When we go to publish, what do we really want? We want text, folder, title, image. So everything's right there for us to publish. But one of the things I have found is that if you are super organized, publishing is really easy, because what is hard about this? Well, it's like when you go to publish, you don't want to be trying to find things. You don't want to be trying to like ask people, is it ready or not? But in this case, everything is going to be here. So when you go to publish, it's just like you open it up, cut and paste, download, publish, go. Yeah, it does take 5 minutes, but it does allow you to be more engaged with your community. You're actually on the platform, so you're more likely to interact with your community and respond to comments, which is going to help your social media perform better. So a lot of what people don't like is that when they go to publish, it's not ready or they can't find things. But when it's all nicely organized, it makes it a lot easier. So we do need to change the filter here. So in this case, it's is approved. Right? We want to make sure all of this stuff is approved. And this isn't an and, it's an or. And in this case, because they're all ands, we don't need the group. So we'll just pull the group out like that. So now it's only showing content that's all approved. So let's jump back to our overview and let's get a few pieces of content in there that are all approved. We'll put a fake title here. Let's assume we did everything and we approve everything. Just to make this easy, I'm going to unapprove that and make this one not approved so it doesn't disappear, so I can approve this one and drag it down before it disappears. Now I'll come back here and approve this one. So now if we come down to publishing, we're ready to go. So we could just simply open up our document, cut and paste what's in here, download the image, whatever we need to do. What we could also do is then add in a publish URL. So if we wanted to keep track of all of our published URLs where they were published, we could add that here, or we could do it with a checkbox. Obviously, keeping track of the published URLs is valuable because then you can create a database. So then here, what we can do is we can add a group, and it's going to show everything here until one of these two things is filled out. So I think in this case, what would we want? We would want to make sure that we want to show it if the published URL is not empty or is empty. And I guess it would be the published checkbox is empty. So I think if I check it here, it disappears. Yeah. Or if I put in a URL, it would disappear. Yeah, there we go. So in this case, actually, we don't need the group either. There we go. So now this is going to be here until we actually publish it, whether we put the URL. So if we went to YouTube and we actually published it, it's going to give us a URL. We could drop that URL here, or we could just say it's published. And then we could create one more view, which is like our content database or published content, right? What kind of icon could we use for that? We could do, so I guess this one would be the checkbox. This one would be maybe a calendar. And then this one could be, I don't know. Is there something for action? Video? There's another one that I like to use. Let's see, film. Yeah, this guy. It's ready to go. So then this one here, we would just come to the filter. In this case, we would remove everything except when the published URL was not empty or the published is checked. So if I come here and I check one of these, now we've got our published database with all of our content. Now, finally, in terms of auto-publishing, this is pretty simple as well. So again, we would want to create an automation based off of when it entered the view if we wanted to do auto-publishing. So we could create another automation here, duplicate, publish content. And then that would be the filter. We would pretty much want to copy this. So I'll show you a cool technique here. We come up to the filtered content. We can actually copy from another view, and you get to choose what you copy. So in this case, we were really looking at the filters, and then you pick the view. So you could go ready to go, and then you could do copy configuration. It's going to copy that over. And so here we would come to this automation and we would duplicate. I guess I'll go ahead and duplicate this one, because that's the one that's more like the initialize content. Duplicate. This would be publish content. When a record enters the view, this one would be publish content. And then it's going to trigger that script. Now in this case, we got to come here and change the action to publish content. Going to finish editing. So now we could come back to our automation. We'd add a new filter here where action equals publish content. Save, realign things. Now in terms of publishing content, there's several different modules that you can use here. If you're going to go with LinkedIn, there's a LinkedIn module. If you want to publish to Instagram, there's an Instagram for Business module. And then there's also other tools like there's Metricool. If you've heard of this, there's a Metricool. This is a more flexible system where you can send one URL, like an image, and it will publish to multiple places. So if you use the built-in make modules, then you have to create different routes. And it gets more complicated, actually, to use make. But if you were to use Metricool, you could just use the Metricool module here. You could schedule a post, create the connection. You would be able to send one piece of content, one CID here to multiple places. So I could create a connection here. You would log in, you would grab your API key, account settings, go to API. Now you do have to have a more expensive account to use their API, but you could grab that API key. You could enter that API key here, save it, and then you could select the brand. I'm gonna use my demo brand, post schedule, publish now, network, YouTube. I'm not gonna actually go through the process of publishing to my YouTube channel because I don't have any good content to use there, but you would pass those URLs in from your Airtable database. Here we have our image, and we've got the URL here, and we've got the video, and you've got the URL there. And then you would be able to go ahead and save this and publish content. If you do need more support on the publishing of the content, make sure to jump into the No Code Architects community. Now, I did want to show you one other thing, which is the free NCA Toolkit. So remember I talked about how there's a free open source project called the No Code Architects Toolkit that would allow you to replace paid services like Placid and generate your own images. I've got YouTube videos that will show you how to install this. I'll link those in the description below. But once you have this installed, you have access to a bunch of different API calls, and I'll show you some examples here. I go into a lot more depth on how to use this. This is an application called Postman, which allows me to test API calls easily without having to build out my own automation. So basically, Postman allows you to test these different API calls without having to build out a whole automation. You can just do it right here. And again, my installation videos will show you how to get access to all of these different templates. But if we take a look here, this one free project is going to allow you to caption videos. So you simply send it a video. This particular video is from the school games. Actually, this is transcribed. Let me go to caption video. But we can send it that same video, and then you can control the colors and the fonts and the different styles, the fancy captions, how the captions are displayed, and you can send that to the API. It's going to process that, and it's going to take that video and respond back with the captions, and that's going to be 100% free. The only thing that you have to do is pay for the hosting where you're running this, which is going to be a lot cheaper than if you buy all these services separately, especially if you're doing a lot of this. So now we've got the URL back here. It's the response. You can open up that video, and here's that captioned video. You can see down here the captions. And beyond captions, there's all sorts of stuff you can do. You can actually have it create a thumbnail. So in our system here, if we wanted to have thumbnails of all of our videos, notice here we don't have a thumbnail of this video. It just shows us this little video icon. Well, if we wanted to have a thumbnail like we do here, we could use the toolkit to generate that thumbnail. There's a bunch of other advanced content automations that you can do, like joining two videos together. This FFmpeg folder here shows you a bunch of other advanced video manipulation endpoints that we have, like cropping images and videos, adding your logo to a video, creating tweet pics just like we did here, like that in Placid. You can mix audio and video together. There's really no limit. This API is actually using this tool called FFmpeg, which I encourage you to check out. It's a really cool open source project that is usually run on your computer. But what I did was I took that and I put it into an API so that you could access it from anywhere. So that creates almost infinite flexibility. And then there's other features like converting your media into MP3s or converting it from one format to another or transcribing videos. Here we can actually transcribe a video, we can get the transcription. We can also get the SRT file for captions. Here's the response here. Here's that SRT file, and here's the actual transcription. You could use that to replace the transcriptions that we were using in the Slack module. There's features for converting your images into video. So if I pass in an image, I can run this and it'll actually turn it into like a Ken Burns style video where it zooms in on the image. This is great for making images a little bit more dynamic for video. Click on that. You can open that up. There's some endpoints to actually execute code in your automations. So if you were in this automation here and you needed to run some code, it'd be very easy to add that in. And there's also endpoints here to upload really large files to S3 or DigitalOcean or Google Drive. And these come in handy when you're processing really large files, which are pretty hard to move around in your standard automations. Now, if you want easy access to the automations that you saw today so that you can simply import them without having to build them out from scratch, including access to this Airtable database that's completely built out, make sure to jump into the No Code Architects community. You can find access to these templates in the Automation Vault. We provide tech support where we promise to solve 100% of all of our members' tech issues or your money back. It's a thriving group. I'm always introducing new automations and cool tools. There's also a Make an Airtable beginner course, a business clarity course, and I personally run calls almost every single day. I'd love to see you in the community. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one.